The whistle came first, thin and far off, somewhere beyond the grain elevator, and Clara Mercer felt the platform boards hum faintly under her shoes before she heard the engine itself. She had been standing in that one spot for the better part of 20 minutes, her gloved hand resting on the handle of her carpet-bag, and now she straightened and looked down the track the way everyone else on the platform had turned to look, as if pulled by the same string. The depot at Kearney was small as depots went, a single low building of clapboard painted the color of a July wheat field, with a freight room at one end and a ladies' waiting room at the other that smelled of coal oil and floor wax and faintly of the peppermints the station master's wife kept in a jar by the ticket window. Clara had sat in that waiting room for the better part of an hour, her trunk already checked through to Sacramento, a small tag looped through its handle with her name written on it in a clerk's careful hand. Now the whole platform seemed to lean toward the sound of the whistle, and she found herself leaning too. The westbound came around the long curve past the stockyards, with the low sun catching its brass fittings and throwing them into brief, hard gold. And then the whole engine was there, huge and black and breathing, its drivers slowing with a great deal of complaint, iron shrieking faintly against iron, steam sighing out along the running boards in white sheets that rolled low across the platform and touched Clara's ankles with a warmth that had nothing gentle in it. The bell on the engine's dome had begun to ring somewhere back around the water tank, and it went on ringing now, a flat, patient iron sound, not urgent, simply insistent, the sound of a large thing announcing that it had arrived and did not intend to stay long. She had never stood so close to an engine before. It was one thing to see the Union Pacific trains go through Kearney on their way to somewhere else, a black shape sliding along the horizon beyond her father's fields, and quite another to stand on the platform while the thing hissed and ticked not 30 feet from her, its heat pressing against her face like an opened oven door, the smell of it strong in her nose, hot oil and cinder and scorched metal and something sharper underneath that she supposed was the coal itself, still burning in the firebox behind that wall of black iron. A brakeman swung down from somewhere with a long-handled oil can and walked the length of the drivers unhurried, touching this and that, as though the great animal in front of him were nothing more than a plow horse wanting its harness checked. "Kearney! Kearney! 10 minutes!" the conductor was calling, moving down the platform with his watch already out of his vest pocket, and passengers who had been standing about idle suddenly discovered urgency, gathering up children and bandboxes and a crate of settin' hens that some farm wife was determined to bring along in the baggage car. Clara let the crowd sort itself around her a moment longer. She was in no hurry. She had nothing to be late for and nowhere she needed to arrive before the day the train arrived there on its own schedule, and there was a comfort in that thought that she had been turning over in her mind for a week now, ever since her father had driven her in from the farm in the spring wagon with her trunk roped down behind the seat. She was going to Sacramento. She said the word to herself sometimes the way another girl might have said the name of a sweetheart, turning it over, tasting the shape of it. Her sister Verna had gone out 3 years before, married to a man named Whitcomb, who had built up a hardware business on J Street, and Verna's letters that first year had been full of homesickness dressed up as cheerfulness. But by the second year, the cheerfulness had gone real, and by the third year, Verna was writing to say that Elias needed someone with a clear hand and a head for figures to keep his books, now that the store had grown past what he could manage with a ledger balanced on the counter between customers? And would Clara consider coming out? And wouldn't it be fine to have her sister near again? Clara had read that letter in the kitchen with the bread not yet in the oven, and had known before she reached the bottom of the page that she would go. It was not that anything was wrong with Nebraska, or with the gray farmhouse she had grown up in, or with her father, who had only nodded when she told him and said that a smart girl ought to use what she had, and Kearney was not going anywhere. She could always come back to it. It was only that a position had opened in the world with her name roughly the shape of it, and she had decided, in the plain, unhurried way she decided most things, to go and fill it. There was no sorrow in the decision. There was, if anything, a kind of pleasant fright, the sort she imagined a swimmer felt standing at the edge of a cold lake in June, not afraid of the water exactly, only aware of the moment just before entering it. A man in a blue coat with brass buttons down the front had come along the cars now, checking the little printed cards slotted into brackets beside each vestibule door, and Clara saw her own car among them. Farther back than the varnished Pullmans up near the engine, a plainer car painted a duller green, with tourist sleeper lettered in gold that had gone a little dull itself along the edges. She had bought her ticket with that in mind. The Pullman fare had been more than she cared to spend on herself, when a perfectly serviceable berth could be had in the tourist car for a good deal less. And Verna's last letter had said plainly that a girl coming out to keep books for a hardware business had no need to travel like a duchess. She gathered her carpet bag and her small hamper of food, bread and cold chicken, and a paper twist of dried apples that her father's housekeeper had pressed on her that morning, insisting the dining car would charge $1 for a plate of eggs, and walked down the platform toward the car with the dull gold letters, past the hiss and tick of the resting engine, past a boy selling newspapers out of a canvas satchel, past a family with 3 children arranged like stair steps, the littlest one crying steadily and without much conviction, more from the excitement of the platform than any real unhappiness. The cinders under her shoes were fine and black and got into the hem of her traveling skirt no matter how she held it up. Somewhere behind her the bell was still ringing, patient, unhurried, the way it would go on ringing, she supposed, at every town between here and California, calling people toward trains the way a church bell called them toward Sunday. At the vestibule steps of the tourist car, a man was standing to help passengers up, one hand out, the other resting easy against the brass rail, and he had about him the particular calm of a person who has done a thing so many times that all the fuss has gone out of it for him, though none of the care. He wore a dark uniform coat with a stiff collar, very clean, and a cap with a small brass badge on the front that caught what was left of the sun. "Evening, miss," he said, and took her hamper from her without seeming to hurry about it, freeing her hand for the rail. "Mind the step? It's higher than it looks from down there. Most folks misjudge it the first time." "Thank you," Clara said, and took the step and felt his hand steady at her elbow for exactly as long as she needed it, and not a moment longer. "Name's Price," he said. "Wendell Price. I've got this car clear through to Ogden, and another fellow takes her on from there to the coast, but you'll want for nothing between here and there that I can help with. What's your section, miss?" She found the ticket in her glove and showed him, and he glanced at it the way a man glances at something he has already half memorized from the manifest in his pocket, and nodded, and said Section 4 would be just this way, and led her into the car ahead of him, walking backward a step or two down the narrow aisle with her hamper balanced easy in one hand, the way a man carries a thing he has carried 10,000 times before and trusts entirely. The inside of the car was dimmer than the platform, and it took her eyes a moment to settle into it. It was not what she had pictured from the outside exactly, though she could not have said what she had pictured instead. Down the center ran a narrow aisle with a strip of worn carpet, red once, now the color of a brick left too long in the weather, and on either side rose the tall backs of what would become, she understood, the lower berths, arranged now as facing seats, the way a parlor might arrange two settees to face each other across a low table, except there was no table, only a wall of varnished wood between each pair of seats, and a window above it framed in the same wood, its shade rolled up to show the last of the platform sliding slowly past. Overhead, closed up flat against the ceiling like great folded wings, ran the upper berths, held there by straps and hooks she could not yet make sense of, waiting for evening. It was a plainer car than she had expected, though she had told herself to expect plainness. The Pullman cars up ahead, she knew from the glimpse she'd had of one gliding past on a siding once outside Kearney, ran to painted panels and brocade and little reading lamps with fringed shades. But here the wood was a good, honest oak, unornamented, scrubbed rather than polished, and the seats were upholstered in a plain woven stuff. Serviceable, the kind of thing meant to be sat on hard by families with children and dusty boots for 4 days running, and to show the wear of it as little as possible. It smelled of coal smoke that had worked itself into the wood over years of runs, and beneath that of dust, and beneath that, very faintly, of the particular mustiness of railway upholstery that had absorbed 1,000 travelers' dinners and damp umbrellas and would go on absorbing them for years yet to come. It was not an unpleasant smell. It was, Clara thought, already beginning to feel like the smell of a small house rather than the smell of a public conveyance, and she supposed that was the trick of it, that a car like this one had to become a kind of house to the people riding in it, whether it wanted to or not. Section 4 was near the middle of the car, and Wendell Price set her hamper down on the seat and touched the brass numeral screwed to the wall above it, 4, plain as that, so she would know it again. "You'll have the lower to yourself tonight, miss," he said. "Car's not full this run. I'll come through and make it up proper after supper, once folks have had their meal and settled some. Till then, it rides just as it sits." "I've never traveled this way before," Clara admitted, because it seemed foolish to pretend otherwise to a man who could plainly see as much in the way she was looking at the folded berth above her head. "Most on this car haven't," he said not unkindly, setting a small stool below the window so she might step up to it more easily when the time came, though he did not say so. She would learn that herself later. "Colonist cars and tourist cars. We get school teachers. We get families moving out to take up land. We get young ladies going out to a position, same as I'd guess you're doing, if you don't mind my saying so." He glanced at the trunk tag still looped through the handle of her carpet bag, Sacramento written plain on it, and something in his face suggested he had read 100 such tags and drawn 100 such correct guesses, and took a quiet, professional satisfaction in it, the way a doctor might take satisfaction in a diagnosis confirmed. 4 days to Ogden from here, near enough, then on to the coast after that. Long ride, but she rides smooth once you're used to her, and I'll see you get what you need along the way. Water coolers at the end of the car yonder, stoves just past it if the evenings run cool, which they will once we're up in the higher country. You'll holler if you want for anything, miss. Mercer, is it?" "Clara Mercer," she said, faintly surprised he'd caught her name so quick off the ticket. "Mr. Price," he said, touching the brim of his cap, and went on down the aisle to the next passenger climbing the vestibule steps, an elderly woman with a hat box and a great deal to say about the trouble she'd had finding a cab, which he received with the same unhurried courtesy he'd given Clara, as though each passenger who boarded his car were the only one he had to attend to that evening, though she could see over the next hour that there were 40 of them at least, and he seemed to carry all their names and wants in his head at once, the way her father carried the names of every cow in his herd and what ailed each one. Clara settled onto the seat by her window and watched Kearney fall away. The depot slid past, then the grain elevator, then a scattering of frame houses with wash still on the lines, and children who ran along fences waving at the train the way children always did, as if the train's passing were an event arranged expressly for their benefit. Then the town gave out altogether, and there was only the country, flat and gold green in the low sun, corn not yet high, a windmill turning lazy against a sky gone the color of a ripe peach at its western edge. The rail joints began their steady beat beneath her, that tunk, tunk, a sound she would come to stop hearing altogether by the second day, the way a person stops hearing their own clock, but which now, new to her, seemed to organize the whole world into a patient rocking rhythm, the fence posts flicking past in time with it, the telegraph wire outside her window dipping and rising, between poles that went by too quick to count. Across the aisle, a young couple with a baby had taken the facing seat, the husband stowing a wicker basket under the seat with the brisk competence of a man who had made this same trip, or one like it, before, and behind them an older woman in gray traveling clothes sat very upright with a Bible on her knee, not reading it, only holding it, the way some people held a thing for comfort rather than use. Further down, half turned in his seat to talk with a farmer across the aisle, a stout man with a sample case wedged under his own seat, was already deep into an account of the crop prospects in 3 counties. The particular confident talk of a drummer who made his living from conversation and had decided evidently that a 4-day trip was not going to pass in silence if he had anything to say about it. Clara took off her gloves, finger by finger, and laid them in her lap, and let herself feel, for the first time since the wagon had pulled out of the farmyard that morning, something loosen in her chest that she had not entirely known was tight. The light outside had gone the deep gold that only came in the last half hour before sundown, and it lay across the corn rows in long bars, and the shadow of the train itself ran along beside them on the ground, a long dark shape keeping pace, bending and stretching over fence and ditch and stubble field, never quite catching up to itself. She thought of her father back at the farm, probably just now unhitching the team, and found she could think of him with a plain, uncomplicated fondness, no ache in it, the way a person thinks of a place they mean to see again rather than one they have lost. Verna's letter was folded in her handbag, soft at its creases from having been read so many times, and she did not need to take it out to remember the last line of it. "Come soon," it had said. "There's a window here that gets the morning sun, and I've already told Elias it's to be your room." The whistle sounded again, far ahead now, for a crossing she couldn't see, 2 long notes and a short and a long, and somewhere up near the front of the car a small boy asked his mother in a carrying whisper whether they were in California yet. And the mother laughed and told him not yet, not for days and days yet. And the boy considered this with the grave patience of a child who has decided that days and days is a very long time indeed, but is prepared to bear it. By the time the sun had gone down proper, a bruised orange line low along the west, with the first stars pricking out above it, the train was slowing for a town Clara didn't catch the name of, and word went down the car past seat to seat the way news traveled on a train, that there would be 20 minutes for supper. She had her hamper, the bread and cold chicken and dried apples, and had meant to make do with that and save her money. But the young couple across the aisle were gathering up their baby in their basket and speaking of the eating house by the depot with enough warmth in their voices. A real hot supper, the husband said, first 1 and 2 days of travel for them, having come up from Grand Island that morning, that Clara found herself curious and told herself that one hot meal at the start of a long journey was not extravagance, but sense, and gathered her own gloves and handbag and went down the steps into the cooling evening with the rest of them. The eating house sat close by the tracks, a long, low building with a porch and a row of windows lit up yellow against the coming dark, and a bell was already ringing on the porch, rung by a boy in an apron too big for him, calling out the 20 minutes as though the passengers streaming off the cars needed reminding, which perhaps some of them did, given the speed at which certain gentlemen made for the porch steps. Inside it was warm, with the smell of coffee and frying meat and biscuit, a long counter down one side with stools bolted to the floor and a row of tables down the other, everything laid already, plates and cups turned up, silver set out in neat lines, as though the house had known to the minute when the train would come and had timed the whole meal to be ready and steaming the moment the first passenger crossed the threshold. Clara supposed it had. She had heard her father speak once of the eating houses along the Santa Fe line, how a man could set his watch by the 20 minutes, and the food would be hot and decent and gone from the plate before the whistle blew again. And this one, farther north though it was, seemed to run on the same clockwork. Girls in white aprons moved between the tables with the quick, practiced grace of people who did this 3 or 4 times a day, every day, setting down plates of fried chicken and boiled potatoes and a kind of pale gravy, filling coffee cups almost before they were empty, and one of them, passing close by Clara's elbow, said, "Coffee, miss?" and had the cup filled, and was 3 steps gone before Clara had properly finished nodding. There was no leisure in it, and yet no rudeness either. It was simply speed married to a kind of care, the same unhurried hurry she had noticed already in Wendell Price, as though everyone whose work touched this railroad had learned the same trick of moving fast without ever looking flustered. She ate quickly, because everyone around her was eating quickly, the whole room full of the small clatter of forks and the low, steady murmur of people talking with their mouths as empty as they could manage between bites, glancing now and then toward the door as though the 20 minutes might run out early if they weren't careful. The chicken was good, plain and hot, fried the way her own housekeeper fried it, and the coffee was strong enough to make her blink, and she found herself grateful for both in a way that had nothing to do with hunger exactly, and everything to do with the simple fact of sitting still for a quarter of an hour at a table that did not sway before the whole business of the evening began again. At the next table, an old man in a canvas coat was telling a boy, probably his grandson, about the building of this very line, years back now, how he'd worked a season on the grading crew somewhere out past the Platte and had watched the rails go down a length at a time, how a man could stand in one spot of a morning and by evening the steel would already be a mile past him, moving west the way water moves downhill, unstoppable and patient, both at once. The boy listened with his fork halfway to his mouth, more interested in the story than the potatoes, and Clara found herself listening too, though she kept her eyes on her own plate, the way a person listens to a stranger's conversation without wanting to seem to. The bell on the porch rang again, 3 strokes this time, and the room came up out of its chairs almost as one body, napkins set down, coins laid by plates, everyone moving for the door with the same unhurried haste that had characterized the whole meal, no one running exactly, but no one lingering either. Clara paid her 35 cents to a woman at a small desk by the door and went back out into the evening, which had gone properly dark now while she'd been inside. The sky over the depot, a deep blue-black with a scatter of stars already thick in it. More stars, it seemed to her, than she was used to seeing even out on the farm, though she knew that couldn't be so, and supposed it was only that there was nothing else out here to compete with them. No trees to speak of, no rise of hill, only the flat, dark land running away in every direction, and the sky arched enormous over the top of it. The engine stood breathing at the head of the train, a red glow visible now in the firebox, where the fireman had the door open, shoveling, his shape black against the flame each time he bent to his work, and steam rose white in the lantern light along the whole length of the train, curling up past the car windows, which were beginning to glow gold one by one as the porters moved through lighting the lamps. Clara climbed back up into her own car and found her seat, and the young couple settled back into theirs across the way with the baby now asleep against the mother's shoulder, and the old woman with the Bible had not moved from her seat at all, had eaten from her own basket rather than leave the car, and sat now looking out at the dark with the book still closed on her knee. The whistle gave 2 long blasts, and the bell took up its ringing again, and with a series of small lurches, each one gentler than the last, the couplings taking up their slack one car at a time in a sound that ran back down the train like a word passed down a line of people, the train began to move. Clara watched the eating-house slide away, its windows still lit, the girls in white aprons already clearing the tables for whatever came through next, east or west. And then the town was gone too, and there was only the dark and the stars, and, somewhere off to the north, a single light that might have been a farmhouse window, burning small and steady and alone in all that black distance, gone from sight almost as soon as she had found it. She sat a while with her forehead nearly touching the cool glass, watching for more such lights and finding few, and thought that this must be something like what the ocean was, this Nebraska dark, this Wyoming dark to come, a great depth of nothing that a person crossed a little at a time, trusting the vessel under them, and she found the thought did not frighten her. If anything, it settled her further into her seat, into the rhythm of the wheels, which had picked up now to their steady running beat. That tunk, faster than before, the lamps overhead swaying very slightly on their brackets, throwing a warm, low, moving light down the length of the car, gold on the oak paneling, gold on the sleeping baby's cheek, gold on the pages of the unopened Bible in the old woman's lap. A boy came through the car not long after, working the aisle with a covered basket over one arm and a wooden tray slung by a strap from his shoulder, calling out in a high carrying voice that had clearly been trained to it, papers, magazines, fresh fruit, candy, sewing notions, running the words together into a kind of chant that he must have said 1,000 times over and would say 1,000 times more before this run was through. He could not have been more than 13, thin as a fence rail, quick on his feet the way boys are quick, when their whole living depends on covering a car and the time it takes a train to run between stops. He had oranges in the basket, real oranges, which surprised Clara enough that she bought one, turning it over in her hand and smelling the sharp, bright oil of the peel before she'd even broken the skin, a smell so unlike anything else on the car, the coal smoke, the hot lamp oil, the wool and dust, that it seemed almost to clear a small space of its own in the air around her. 10 cents, miss, and worth every penny of it, the boy said, already moving on. Come all the way from California, that one has. Funny thing to be carrying it back out there again, ain't it? And he grinned at his own joke, the grin of a boy who has made that same small joke to every passenger who bought an orange since Omaha and did not intend to retire it before he had to. The drummer bought a newspaper and a cheap paper-bound novel both, and settled into a study of the newspaper first, holding it up close to the lamp and remarking now and then, to no one in particular, on the state of the wheat market or the doings of some senator, the sort of talk a man makes when he wants company, but has not quite decided how to ask for it outright. The farmer across from him obliged him for a while, and then excused himself toward the smoking compartment at the end of the car, and the drummer, left without an audience, turned his attention companionably to Clara. "First trip out?" he asked, not unkindly, folding his paper down. "It is," Clara said. "Thought so. You've got that look. Not worried, mind, just new. I've made this run 11 times now, sell notions and hardware fittings, out to Ogden and back, out to Ogden and back, like a shuttle in a loom." He said it with a certain rueful pride, a man fond of his own steadiness even while he complained of it. "You'll find your feet by tomorrow noon. It's a long ride, but she's an easy one, this line. Good roadbed mostly. Wyoming'll shake you up some crossing the summit, but nothing to trouble a body." "I'm going out to my sister," Clara offered, because it seemed the kind of thing one said to a stranger on a train. A small coin of information traded for another. "She's in Sacramento. I'm to keep books for her husband's store." "Sacramento's a fine town," the drummer said, with the easy authority of a man who had passed through it twice and considered that sufficient acquaintance to pronounce on it. "You'll like the valley. Green the year round, or near enough, not like this." He gestured with his folded paper at the window, at the dark beyond it where Nebraska was sliding past unseen. "Well, I wish you good fortune of it," he said, and returned to his paper, the exchange complete, both of them satisfied by it in the mild, undemanding way that strangers on a train are satisfied by such exchanges, needing nothing more from each other than the pleasant confirmation that the hours passed a little easier for having been shared, however briefly, with another human voice. Clara peeled her orange slowly, letting the peel come away in one long, unbroken spiral, the way she'd learned to do as a girl, and ate the sections one at a time, looking out at her own reflection in the black glass, which showed her the lamp-lit car superimposed over the invisible country beyond it, so that she seemed to be riding through her own reflected shoulder, through the ghost of the drummer's newspaper, through a phantom doubling of the whole warm gold room she sat in, hung out there in the dark like a lantern nobody had thought to light for any particular reason, except that the dark required it. It came to her, watching that reflection, that the car really was something like a small house set loose to travel, Exactly as she'd thought earlier, only more so now that full dark had come down outside. By day, the window had still shown the country going by, fields and fence lines and grain elevators standing up at intervals like exclamation marks against the sky, proof that the car was moving through a world that still resembled the world she'd left. But now there was only the black glass and the gold room reflected in it, and beyond that black glass she knew without being able to see it an emptiness so wide that the train itself must look, to anything watching from outside, a hawk roosting in a lone cottonwood, say, or nothing at all, no one, nothing, just the raw plain itself, like a single lit thread being drawn slowly and steadily across an enormous dark cloth. She found she liked the thought. The dark out there was simply empty country asleep, and the whole business of crossing it was managed, ordered, timed to the minute by men who knew this line the way her father knew every furrow of his own north field, and she was only a passenger inside all that competence, warm, fed, with an orange in her hand and a lamp swaying gently overhead, and 4 days of exactly this small ordered warmth moving through a large simple darkness, stretching out ahead of her all the way to a sister's kitchen with a window that got the morning sun. The lamps themselves were a mystery she found herself studying, small brass fixtures set into the ceiling at intervals down the car, each one burning behind a little frosted globe, and she asked Wendell Price about them when he came back through checking on his passengers, and he told her, without any air of a man interrupted at his work, that they burned oil on this car still, though some of the newer equipment on the road had gone over to a kind of gas carried in tanks under the floor, pilot lights and all, which he personally found a good deal more trouble to tend than a plain oil lamp a man could fill and trim with his own 2 hands and be done with it. "I'll turn them down low once the car's made up for the night," he said. "Folks sleep better without full light coming through the curtains, and there's them that likes to raise a window shade and look at the country going by even at night, moon out or no moon, and a low lamp don't spoil that for them the way a bright one would." "Does anyone truly look out at night, I mean, when there's nothing to see?" "More than you'd think, miss," he said, and something in the way he said it, mild, sure, without any need to convince her further, told Clara that he had watched a great many passengers do exactly that over a great many nights, watched them lie in the dark with a shade raised an inch or two, looking out at nothing very much, and had come to understand, in his own quiet professional way, that the nothing very much was in fact the whole point of it. Outside, the stove at the end of the car ticked as it cooled, and then, fed again by some unseen hand, began to tick the other way as the iron took up new heat, and somewhere past the water cooler a tin cup clinked once against its chain and was still. The rail joints kept their beat under everything, patient as a heart, and the car swayed with the small, easy side-to-side motion Clara now understood to be simply how the world moved out here at night at speed toward California. It was some while later the lamps burned down a notch from where they'd stood at supper time that Wendell Price came back through the car with a folded stack of sheets over one arm and began, without any fuss or announcement, the business of making up the berths. He worked from the front of the car toward the back, section by section, and Clara watched him do the first 2 or 3 before he reached her own, curious in spite of herself at how a settee and a window and a length of empty air above it could be turned in the space of perhaps 4 minutes into a He drew the seat cushions together first, sliding one toward the other until the two facing seats made a single flat surface the width of a narrow bed, and laid a thin mattress over the join, and over that a sheet tucked close and snug at the corners the way a nurse might tuck one or a mother. Then he reached up to the folded shelf above, unhooked some catch Clara could not quite follow with her eye, and swung the whole upper berth down and out on its hinges until it hung level, a good 2 feet above where the lower one now lay made, a narrow shelf of its own, with a mattress already fitted to it, thin as the lower one, meant for a single sleeper, and no more. He set a small ladder, hardly more than 3 iron rungs, against the edge of the lower berth for whoever would climb to the upper, should a family need both. And then he took down, from a rod that ran along the top of the car the whole of its length, a heavy curtain of dark green cloth, and hung it on its rings, so that it fell floor to ceiling along the aisle side of the section, closing the whole berth off from the rest of the car the way a good thick curtain closes off a stage. "There now," he said to the family he was working for just then, a farmer and his wife with 2 children who watched the whole operation with the frank, unblinking interest of people watching a conjuring trick. "That'll see you comfortable through to morning. Mind the little one doesn't take the ladder for a plaything once you're settled. It's not built to bear a child's whole weight swinging on it, though I've known them to try." He said it plainly, not as a warning meant to frighten, but as the kind of small practical instruction a man gives out of long habit. The same way he might tell a passenger which end of the car the water cooler stood at, and the farmer's wife thanked him and laughed a little, and the making up went on down the car, section by section, until it reached Clara's own. "Just the lower for you tonight, miss, as I said," Price told her, drawing her 2 seats together with the same unhurried economy of motion he'd shown at every berth before hers. The sheet smoothed and tucked in 3 practiced movements, the green curtain drawn along its rod and looped back on a small brass hook, so she might step behind it when she was ready, and not before. "I'll leave the upper folded up out of your way, since you've no need of the room it'd take up hanging there empty. You'll find a net yonder above the window for your things, and the shade cord's just here." He touched it, a thin braided cord running down the window frame. "Raise it soft. It don't need much pulling. Anything else you want before I go on down the car?" No, thank you, Mr. Price. You've thought of everything." "That's the whole of the job, miss," he said, and there was no false modesty in the way he said it, only a plain man's plain accounting of what he was paid to do and did well, and he touched his cap and moved on to the next section, where the old woman with the Bible was already folding her shawl into a small, neat square to serve, Clara guessed, as a pillow of her own choosing, rather than trust the flat, thin one the car provided. Clara did not go behind her own curtain at once. She sat a while longer, with her orange peel gathered into a neat pile on a scrap of paper, and watched the last of the car's evening business wind down around her. The drummer folding his newspaper for the last time and stretching, the farmer's children already tucked and quiet behind their own green curtain 2 sections up, only the small shapes of their feet visible where the fabric didn't quite meet the floor. The lamps had been turned lower still, so that the aisle now ran in a kind of dim golden dusk, curtain after curtain drawn along its length, each one glowing faintly where a passenger inside had not yet put out whatever small light they kept for themselves, a candle stub or a low-turned reading lamp of their own carrying. When she judged the hour right, she rose and drew her own curtain closed behind her, and found herself, for the first time, entirely alone in a space perhaps 4 feet by 6, walled on 3 sides by dark wood and green cloth, and lit only by the thin gold seam of lamplight that showed along the curtain's edge. It was a strange business, undressing in so narrow a place, with the whole weight and motion of the car working against her at every turn. A lurch at a switch point nearly sent her sitting down hard on the made bed before she meant to, and she laughed under her breath at herself, glad no one could see, and braced one hand flat against the window frame to steady herself the rest of the way. She had been warned of this by Verna's letters, which had described the business with a good deal of good humor. You learn to dress a shoe at a time, sitting down, Verna had written, and to trust your elbows more than your eyes. And Clara found the warning had not been exaggerated in the least. She sat on the edge of the berth to work free of her shoes, and stood in a crouch that would have looked absurd to anyone watching, which no one was, to manage the hooks down the back of her traveling waist, and folded each garment as she freed herself of it into a small, tight bundle that she stowed, following the lead of a folded card tacked to the wall with a little diagram on it, in the netting hammock strung along the wall above the window, a loose mesh of cord sagging gently with the sway of the car, meant to keep just such bundles from sliding to the floor in the night. Her shoes she set beneath the berth where her feet would find them without groping. Her watch, a small silver one that had been her mother's, she hung by its chain from a hook beside the window, where the last thread of lamplight from the aisle caught its face just enough to let her read the hour, should she wake and want to know it. She had brought her own nightgown rather than trust the car's thin blanket alone against the night air, and pulled it over her head sitting down, ducking to keep clear of the berth's low ceiling, which pressed close enough above her that she could not have stood upright inside the curtain, even had there been room to try. It was a strange, cramped, entirely serviceable little world she had made for herself in those few minutes, no bigger than a large cupboard, and yet by the time she had finished and drawn the thin blanket up over her knees and settled back against the flat pillow, it had already begun to feel like a room of her own in a way that surprised her, smaller than any room she had ever slept in, and somehow, for all that, not unwelcoming. She lay a while in the dark listening before she let herself think of sleep at all, because there was too much to listen to yet, and she was not ready to close the evening off. Somewhere past midnight, she could not have said how she knew this, only that the quality of the dark behind her curtain had changed, deepened, the last thread of aisle lamplight gone thinner still. The train began to slow, the steady thaw-tunk of the rail joint spacing out, growing lazier, until at last there came a long exhaled sigh of steam from somewhere up near the engine, and the whole car settled, with a soft final lurch, into stillness. A water stop, she supposed, or a coaling point, one of the small, nameless places that existed, so far as she could tell, for no other reason than that the engine required feeding at regular intervals across so great a stretch of empty country. She reached up and found the shade cord Wendell Price had shown her, and drew it soft, the way he'd said, and the shade rose an inch, 2 inches, enough to show her a slice of the night outside. No depot lit up gold this time, no eating house, only a water tank standing black against the stars like some solitary grain elevator's cousin, and a lantern moving along the trackside at the height of a man's hand, swinging gently as whoever carried it walked the length of the train, checking, she supposed, the same journal boxes and couplings that had been checked a dozen times already since Kearney. She heard voices, low, unhurried, two men somewhere near the tender, exchanging a few words she couldn't make out, one of them laughing once, briefly, at something the other had said, and then the long, groaning creak of the water spout swinging out on its arm and the rush of water going into the tank above the engine. A sound like a great door opened onto rain, steady and full and strangely peaceful for all its volume, precisely because there was nothing urgent in it, only a thing being done that needed doing by men who had done it 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 times more. The lantern passed her window once, swinging low, its light sliding warm and yellow across the drawn shades of the sleeping car and touching, for half a second, the raised inch of her own, so that she saw briefly the shape of a man's arm and the glint of a lantern's glass before it moved on past and left her again in the dark. She did not feel watched or exposed or uneasy in any part of herself. She felt, if anything, like a child half woken in a house where the grown people were still moving quietly about their evening business below, reassured rather than disturbed by the small sounds of competent hands at work in the dark. The waterspout groaned back to its resting place. A bell rang once, short. Some signal passed between the fireman and whoever stood at the tank, and then the whistle gave a single low note, more announcement than alarm, and the couplings took up their slack again one by one down the length of the train. That same word passed car to car that she had heard back at the eating-house stop, and the wheels began their turning, slow at first, thap, tunk, gathering themselves, gathering speed, until within a minute or two the beat had settled back into its old steady running rhythm, and the water tank and its lantern were gone behind them into the dark, swallowed up as completely as if they had never stood there at all. Clara left the shade, raised its small inch, and lay watching the country slide by beneath a moon that had climbed, while she wasn't looking, well up into the eastern sky, near full, laying a thin silver wash over everything it touched. There was little enough to see, and everything to see in the way of open country at night. No more fields marked out by fence and furrow now, only a long, unbroken swell of prairie running off pale and featureless to a horizon she could just barely tell from the sky above it, the two divided by nothing more than a faint difference in the density of the dark. Now and then a line of trees marked a creek bottom, black and ragged against the silver ground, gone almost before she had properly found it with her eye. Once, far off, a light burned low and steady, another farmhouse window keeping its own watch, and she thought of the family behind it, whoever they were, asleep or not asleep, and felt toward them the same wide, easy kinship she had felt toward the lantern-carrying men at the water tank, all of them awake or dreaming under the same enormous sky, all of them in their different fixed and moving houses, tending their own small warm rooms against the dark. The moonlight lay across the foot of her berth in a long, pale bar that brightened and dimmed as the car swayed, and she watched it slide back and forth, with the unhurried attention a person gives to a thing that asks nothing of them and only wants watching. The rail joints kept their beat beneath her, steadier now than she had noticed them all evening, or perhaps only steadier to her because she had grown so used to them that they had stopped announcing themselves as a sound at all and become instead a kind of pulse the whole car breathed by. Tha tunk, tha tunk. unhurried, patient, endless. Somewhere down the aisle, the old woman's berth gave a small creak as she turned in her sleep. The stove at the end of the car ticked once, cooling again. A gust of wind found some seam in the car's woodwork and drew a thin, low note out of it, there and gone, like a hand passed once over the strings of an instrument left leaning in a corner. She thought drowsily of Verna's kitchen window that got the morning sun, and of the ledger books waiting for her clear hand, and of her father back home, who would by now be long asleep himself under a Nebraska roof that did not move at all, and she found she could hold both those stillnesses in her mind at once, without any weight to either of them. The fixed house behind her and the moving one she rode in now, both of them in their way, home enough for the night. The pleasant fright she had carried onto the platform at Kearney had gone somewhere quiet inside her over the course of the evening, worn smooth by supper and orange peel and lamplight and the sure, unhurried competence of the people who ran this small world she had been carried into, and what was left in its place was only a kind of loosened, grateful tiredness, the good, honest tiredness of a day well spent and a night well begun. Her eyes had grown heavy without her quite marking the moment it happened, the moonlit bar at the foot of her berth swimming soft at its edges, the rhythm of the wheels folding itself, unnoticed, into the rhythm of her own slowing breath until the two were no longer two things but one, a single patient beat carrying her on and on through the dark, west toward morning, toward her sister's window and the sun that would find it, and somewhere in the middle of that thought, without any clear line she could afterward have named as the crossing of it, Clara Mercer was asleep.